So
Darcy
there's
just
a
lit
Can we just do a
up.
special ed funding one and I can just talk about special ed
Can you
funding
make it
the whole
fun?
time?
Can you make it fun? We'll
There's
put the
Stefan.
fun in funding. Write it down.
I'm Anna.
I'm Darcy.
And I'm Leanne, and we're here to discuss court cases because they teach us how to effectively run special education.
And I'm Stefan. I work in general education, and I'm here to get spedsplained to.
So Rowley and
Rowley.
Endrew. Okay. So Rowley is a Supreme Court case that was in 1982. And this little girl, their family sued and was concerned about free, appropriate public education. So again, they went under that kind of FAPE umbrella. She was a child with a hearing disability. She had a hearing aid, and her parents said she needs an interpreter. And the school district said, we're not providing an interpreter. She has a hearing aid. She can hear well enough, and she has access to the curriculum. So the kind of big legal standard is like what what is enough education around faith, right? Like, do we have to maximize your potential, right? Is that like the goal, or kind of what is that legal language? So
And
does the
they kind of
no,
like this was falling under the Education for All Handicapped Children Act, right? Like it was referencing back to that in order to figure out how you're going to establish that care or not care, but like
right, that
your educational rights under it.
right. And like how people decide to write goals and things like that, right? Like we've gone back and forth. Should we write standard-based goals because we should be teaching to the standards? So there's like all these things that, and I don't know that either one of these really give us the answer of how to do it. So like in Leanne's words, like where are the bumpers in regards to fate for schools? Birdwalk, I say fate depends on where you live.
Can I guess what you mean by that? And you can tell me where I'm wrong.
Mhm.
If you were to say FAPE depends on where you live, uh, then like if I live in, and I guess you just gave me a cheat. If I live in an urban area where there's a ton of resources, a lot of money floating around, a lot of people, they're passing their levies, they've got a whole lot of, then you have access to more stuff for that kid. But if you are in the middle of nowhere and you have a teacher who teaches a 3-4 split and they have no classified staff support, then this kid might really need something that kid who's in the urban area really needs, and they literally just don't have it. Like literally
Mhm.
just do
Yep.
not have access to it. And so you can't say that. I guess the argument would be, or what you're driving at would be, that you can't say FAPE is a one size fits all because kids are so different, but also school systems in different areas of the state, country, whatever, look very different, have access to different things.
Yep.
So there's probably not a whole lot of cases that go all the way where you're using, let's take our state, east side, west side, very rural, very urban, where like if you're on the east side of the state in a rural area where there's not a lot of resources, you kind of can't point to a case in Seattle Public Schools or in the Puget Sound area or like Vancouver School District, because those districts are so huge and have so many things, and like tiny little schools with graduating classes of 100 in our region, just apples and oranges. Is that the
Yeah.
idea?
Absolutely. So I can give you a parallel to that. If you're in our region, due to driving distance and things, we have no day treatment schools.
Mhm.
If you're in Seattle, you can pick between eight.
What's a day treatment school?
Like if you need to go to a more therapeutic setting during the school day.
Gotcha.
So it would be
Gotcha.
like residential, but you're not staying overnight, but it's specific to whatever your needs are.
And
Mm.
another example is in Spokane, there are deaf and hard of hearing, or there's one school that
might house all those students that are using sign language as their primary communication. So you'd have access to a bunch of signers. Nothing
And
like that
peers
exists
that-
locally.
Yeah.
Yeah, you'd have a community.
Or even the fact that eligibility might be different depending on where you live. So if you're in a district that has a very, like the average test scores are very low, it may be more difficult to meet the bar of eligibility than it would be if you were in a district where you really stood out as being in the bottom percentile. And part of
So
that
you're
is
comparing
because
to your peers, and if your peers are all below grade level, then you're not going to qualify, right? Because you're also below grade level. If all of your peers are above grade level and you're slightly below, then now you look like you're the odd man out.
but there's also the funding cap. So once you get to the funding cap, which is the 15%, then it doesn't make sense to keep on identifying a bunch more students and not have any money coming in to support the services that they need.
Explain the funding cap to me.
Oh, this is
I'll
like
let
a
Darcy whenever
whole
it's
new
money.
topic.
So
Darcy
there's
just
a-
lit
Can we just do a
up.
special ed funding one and I can just talk about special ed
Can you
funding
make it
the whole
fun?
time?
Can you make it fun?
There's
We'll put the
definitely-
fun in funding. Write it down. It's a
to put it short, there's a certain percentage of students that can be identified on an IEP to get a certain level of funding from the state and like federally. Beyond that, right now, what is 15% in Washington? They don't get those excess special ed funds. But there's a push to lift that cap. It's already been raised. They're trying to take it away. It's a whole thing.
And it doesn't exist in all the states. I think some of the states don't have a cap.
So Rowley, what you see in most of the cases and some that we've already discussed, they use this. The court is not required, or the program is not required to maximize the child's potential, but rather to provide a basic floor of opportunity.
not
So that's
okay. Okay.
right. So we're saying, Darcy, you could have been a master celloist. And they gave me a basic
Sophisticated.
floor of opportunity. I took band, right? I was really, really bad. They kept asking me to leave. My mom said I couldn't leave, right? So I mean, they gave me the opportunity, but they really didn't like make sure that I maximized. I still am really, really bad at all things music.
Okay. And so
So
the court is saying that's the
that's the FAPE standard.
okay, and that was in Rowley. That was the
Yeah.
findings from Rowley. Okay.
Yeah. Did you give them the opportunity?
Okay.
And this is a crowd, right? Like no one likes that.
Yeah. When was
Especially
that?
when you're 82.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, especially when you're writing IEPs and parents are coming to you and complaining, and you'll like people used to say, "Well, we're not giving you the Cadillac." Right?
Gotcha.
Like, have you heard that kind of
Yeah.
phrase, right? Like you get the Chevy. I don't know if that's a good car comparison or not.
You get the Honda Civic, I think, right? It's a super basic car. It'll get you where you need
Your
to
windows
go.
still roll down like
Yeah, there you go. But it's not meant to go 0 to 60 in like 4 seconds. I get you. Like it's the schools have an obligation to give you the opportunity to maximize your own potential. No,
Yes.
Okay. Yep. Okay.
So can I ask a question? Because I have also always heard Rowley as one of those first big like this shows how much the court can impact us in special ed. Like this was one of the big earlier court cases that it really is like the court has a say in where we're going. Is that accurate?
Well, I mean, very few special ed cases make it to Supreme Court. So, I mean, Rowley and Endrew are the two I know of. There may be one more.
Like
And
individual
that's
student cases?
well, they make it because lower courts disagreed. And so then Supreme Court has to make the final call. because there was an appeal that was the opposite of the original, correct, Darcy? So yes, absolutely. Like the law can only be enforced if we understand it, and that's through court cases. And so they're trying to understand what is FAPE. And so both cases are about what is FAPE, right?
Yeah, and that's why it's really hard because courts also are never going to tell us how to do it. They're never going to say, this is FAPE, do it this way. Right. And so when I think about like when I was, okay, I wasn't teaching in 82, at least I'm not that old. Right. But going through education, all those things, that was, you have to provide them the opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
You got to
Access.
give them access, give them space for that. So I think that this was kind of a monumental in special ed in regards to what does that look like for kids. I also think that it's really hard if any of these cases and the law in any kind of way has to just look at the individual. We look at like stats and things as like disproportionality, but at the end of the day, you're still having an evaluation meeting about that one kid and whether that one kid qualifies that one way.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I think that that's why courts sit up here and kind of are like, I'm just going to give you like some really general attorney words that in the world of education and your day-to-day planning mean this, like zero.
Yeah. Well,
Except for that
Oh, go
every
ahead.
case about FAPE is going to be ran through this Rowley standard or this Endrew standard. So it does absolutely affect what we do, even if we don't know the case inside and out. It's
But I think
impacting all special ed teachers.
it informs the work teachers do as well. Again, from a gen ed lens, I remember my first year teaching and being pulled out for an all district professional development or something like it's like big staff PD, and a ton of us in this room. They asked the question like essentially a turn and talk, discuss. It's the teacher's responsibility to make sure a student learns. And as a first year teacher, I like turned to my principal at the time. I was like, duh, right? Like that's my job. Like my job is to do what, and I remember she said, not everybody in this room believes that. And I guess if you've got a Supreme Court ruling, not that anybody in that room was going to point, but so maybe you, Darcy, you were definitely with the district at the time. You might have been able to point to Rowley at 82, but I don't think that the teacher sitting across me at the table was saying, well, according to such and such Supreme Court case, it's my job to provide the floor and give students the opportunity to learn, and either they can seize it or not. And who believes that is my dad, who's not an educator, and my my mom and I will go round and round with him because she's a retired teacher about how it's so teaching is so much more than that. It's not just about, hey, here's or my brother-in-law who's a crazy smart guy but just thinks that you can just give kids a textbook and they'll learn because that's how he learned. And I do think there's an element of that, just the other side of that. I mean, you can't learn if someone else does all the work for you. Like they're not helping themselves. I think it's got to be all about balance, right? Like you have to provide kids the opportunity to learn. They have to take it. But if I'm hand over hand writing for all of my kids, they're not learning how to write. They're not learning how to think. It's just from the ed tech world. It's what everybody's afraid about with large language models and ChatGPT is it's going to rob them of the opportunity to engage in the learning process and help themselves. That's what the SEL standards are all about, right? Self-efficacy, like how do you take care of yourself, self-management, how do you push yourself? How do you engage with your community? Like how do you push yourself, right? I think maybe with a gray area there is it's a teacher's job to also facilitate that and bend over backwards for their kids to make sure they're given all of the individual opportunities that they need. I mean, that's equity, right? Everybody gets what they need. Equality is everybody gets the same thing. So I think
And
I'm
when
not
you
sure
have
if
someone with a disability that doesn't necessarily have the skills to get all of those pieces to help themselves, quote unquote, what's that? Where's the first step? Not even the next step, but where do you start?
mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of personal responsibility, and I think it's going away.
There's one of those
How
bird walks.
no
Just
how
gonna
well how
own,
so?
just like I think we have lots of examples where the system has said it's okay, don't have personal responsibility. Um, and I'm I mean I really appreciate the balance,
Hmm.
right? Like there has to be like these kids are protected for a reason, right? For having a disability because they don't know that balance. They don't know how to ask for what they need. They aren't sure how to get this understand things the same way. And so I think that that's a piece of that like personal responsibility.
Yeah. Like once they're given what they need to access their education, then they should be expected to take personal responsibility. Is it Hattie that says like one of the number one indicators for a student being effective is what the teacher believes they can do?
Yep.
And if you've got this, it makes me think about what you said, Darcy, a little ways back about like outcomes for kids and IEPs is not great. And that's probably because of the outlook we have for kids on IEPs. And like if you're not requiring them to do rigorous work, you're not requiring them to have that personal responsibility, then you're handicapping them.
We have this desire to give achievement tests that give a potential, a number that will capture student potential. And when you do that, then it's easier to lower the bar. And I came across the great George W. Bush quote that is the soft bigotry of low expectations.
Okay, so Rowley
Yeah.
says you got to give them the opportunity. That was 82.
And so then in 2017, Andrew F comes along. This was a kiddo with significant behavior and educational needs. And the case really was was around what is educational benefit as established by Rowley and challenged. Shouldn't it mean more meaningful and appropriate level of progress? And so it kind of like I love the language, but I feel like we kind of just tweaked it a little bit. Like this still is not, we're talking about like maximum benefit or anything like that, right? So what comes out of Raleigh is this language around um, it should be clarified that we should set ambitious goals for the student with disabilities and provide services that will allow those students to make progress in the gen ed curriculum. But they use the word meaningful educational progress, and it should be appropriately ambitious in light of the child's unique needs. So, and it comes out and everyone's like, oh, it's going to change the world. Everyone in education is good, in special ed is going to do the best things for the kids. It's going to be meaningful educational progress. And then, of course, they put appropriately ambitious in light of the child's unique needs.
Mm,
So I have another reason to kind of just like keep it at the base floor. It
yeah.
feels like, and we were all really excited when it came out because we thought it really would change our teaching and outcomes for kids.
I mean, I was still relatively new. I was 5 years into my career when Andrew came out. And I think for me as an, newish educator, it was more about like we're gonna have the right conversations to make sure that this IEP and our services are appropriate for this kid. Not that I don't think it changed my practice because I was already doing that, but I remember having like a conversation in our sped department at the time, and maybe this was before it fully went through, but the talks about it in my district of like are you guys having those conversations? Are you truly analyzing each individual student need? And for me, it was like Stefan talking about in his staff meeting. I was like, yeah, isn't that the point of an IEP? But for some teachers, that was really hard. It was like, well, this is how we do the resource room. And, the kids fit into these groups. And at the time, I had thought it was just because I was teaching life skills. And so I was like, well, none of my kids are the same. So of course I'm having that conversation separately. But as I've like gone along, I think part of it is more the change here of requiring more individual need, not providing base education.
But you have hope.
I do have hope. And I think I have hope in how our teachers are coming into the system. Like how are our universities and colleges training them? Are they looking into Andrew and having those conversations about what should be? I think, granted, I think where I went to school did that really well, and we had a lot of practicums and time in classrooms.
I think the difference to me is that I'm glad we have a little bit better language, but I saw those things happening before Andrew. I have never attended an IEP anywhere where someone said, what's the lowest thing that they can do?
Since Anna, you said you were in the classroom when Endrew F came out, were you aware of it until like your administrator said something about it, or?
No, as a teacher, I didn't pay
Yeah, right.
attention
Like
to
as a
any of
classroom teacher, I've got kids in front of me, and that's the most important thing in my world when I'm teaching. And so I'm not paying attention to court cases. And so it's leadership's responsibility to take a look at the systems and appropriately support their teachers and move that along, right? So I mean, I know I trust that being an administrator, especially in a building, is a thankless, difficult, complicated job. But I guess what does that look like, right? Like yeah, I don't know. If we've talked a little bit about access to resources. What if you're in a tiny little district where you don't have the luxury of, well, this special education teacher is not setting appropriately rigorous goals like the Supreme Court decision has said they should, so we can't just like replace them. I guess I'm about to answer my own question. Is it professional development? Is it like what do those
Yeah.
little tiny districts do to support their
I
teachers
think
in?
it goes back to that FAPE is determined by your zip code a little bit, where if you live in one of these school districts that is regularly facing due process, you're going to get a lot of PD just through that process. So everybody that had to sit in court, that had to debrief the case, there's tons of follow-up that a district will do to make sure that they have adopted new process and procedures to keep that from happening again if they lose. Um, there's a lot of professional development. And then in these other districts where families don't have the resources to get an attorney and file due process, you can maybe get away with things that's a lower bar for a long period of time.
But I think that's a little bit where ESDs come into play, right? Is like
Exactly.
helping our district see what's coming. And I mean, I think obviously I'm biased, but I think our ESD does a really good job of centering kids in those conversations. Like, hey, here's something that the law conference talked about, and sure, it's the same 20 cases, right, from the last couple of years that we're talking about. But then what I think these ladies do really well is say, okay, and what does that mean for your students? It's not just what does that mean for what you're doing, but think about the kids that you guys are serving every single day. What changes do you need to make to help support them? Not just what changes do you need so that we're not getting into a lawsuit, right? Like our conversations in our region are not about avoiding a lawsuit. Our conversations are about doing what's best for kids.
Yeah, and I think Andrew did that. I mean, it raised the standard for FAPE,
It
right? From this
also,
like minimal level to you have to make meaningful progress. It has to be specific to the kid, and you have to have some kind of progress monitoring, right? And those are kind of the big things that we see in cases. They're looking for where's your data? What did you communicate to the family? And did you guys agree that this was like appropriate for this child?
yeah, there's those two things that I think I see on a daily basis is you have to have data to support that your student is making reasonable well-calculated progress. And I wouldn't say that I saw that being a focus of PD as much before 2017, maybe, as it is now, because we know that's how you justify that you provided FAPE. But then there's also another piece of the Endrew case that was that schools have to consider and give a cogent and responsive explanation for all their decisions. So a parent used to be able to come in and say, I want this, and the district could just say no and not give them an explanation. Now they would lose. So I think it maybe beefed up that piece too, where parents have a little bit more.
So is that why we have what we have in the prior written notice now of like these actions were considered and rejected and like explain why? Or was
I
that
don't know
always-
that was new from
Okay.
Rowley,
No,
though.
I don't think the prior written notice has
I
changed.
think they just called that out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a really great resource from understood.org that has talking points for parents around Endrew F.
Can we
That-
put that in the show notes?
I'm
in
gonna,
the show
yeah,
notes.
I'm gonna send it. But also, another one is just the word ambitious had never come up before around IEP goals either. So parents can really push back on, is that ambitious enough? And I do think before Andrew, we saw, and I don't even like to say this, but districts keeping the same goal for students year after year after year because they hadn't met it. But that's not going to ever meet the standard of ambitious or reasonably calculated.
Interesting. Okay, I feel like I've got a pretty good handle on both of those.
Okay.
So Rowley's just now obsolete since Endrew F, but that was still kind of the standard up until 2017. I guess not standard. You guys just talked at length about how work above and beyond that base floor was happening in districts anyways. And the way you describe that, Darcy, with like everyone's got to make meaningful progress, you have to track data on that. I mean, you also ideally just described the general education classroom, like all of your kids need to make a certain amount of progress and you track data on that because we make, data informed decisions. So
Yes.
that's okay. Okay. Final word on Rowley and Endrew F. Rowley's obsolete because it said you had to provide the base level education, and Endrew F said that goals needed to be, I'm really going to take away the appropriately ambitious. Is that correct? All right.
Yeah.
Progress is everything. Progress and parent participation were increased. The standard was increased with Andrew.
Well, I was going to say parent participation since you said progress and then you took both of them.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. I agree. I think hopefully because of them engaging in more actual conversations with everybody at the table and what the education should look like.
I just appreciate Andrew raising the standard of FAPE. I think, we need to keep doing the great work that is happening out there and keeping it very individualized and staying focused on the student. Thanks for tuning in to Spedsplaining. If you've got questions or thoughts about today's episode, we'd love to hear from you. Head over to our links where you can drop in your questions, join the conversation, and connect with us. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode if you found it helpful. Until next time, stay curious, and Stefan will keep Spedsplaining.